Money FM 89.3, best of weekends.
Angela Mancini is the partner at Control Risks here in Singapore. Their company, of course, across Asia assesses what's going on for business intelligence, how not only political things but economic shifts and trends impact business around the region. So let's focus our discussion now with Angela on what the U.S. election or outcome, whichever way it may go, or the indecision we have right now, what does that mean for businesses here in Singapore and across Asia? Angela, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on with us today. As you are looking, as everybody is, checking in on the TVs every few hours or every day or whatever it is, what strikes you about the impact of this process that we are going through right now on businesses across this region?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say, you mentioned Control Risks as a risk consultancy, and I've said in a number of interviews, like, thank goodness we're not a polling firm. Because while we're very busy looking at the risks, at least we don't have to, look at it post-mortem as a polling firm. I think it's a very obviously interesting time. I'm watching the media every few seconds. It's not even every hour at this point. But there's a couple different facets, right? I think, I was speaking with some colleagues of mine in the States earlier this morning, as they wrapped up the week. And the first point I'd make is businesses outside the States and Asia, our clients here, and I've been on phone with clients the last, kind of 48 hours around the region, they're already kind of looking forward to the policies. Like, so what would a Trump or a Biden win? Most likely we think it's going to be a Biden win mean for policies, and we can discuss that. But in the States, they're very much, day of. They're still in the moment. So I think, from an immediate perspective of what are the risks to businesses, like kind of now until there's a concession, assuming that Biden wins and Trump concedes at some point. So kind of that period of time before we get into longer term policy impacts. So the immediate term, I think everyone breathed a real sigh of relief that we didn't see the security issues we thought we might see at the polls. So that's the first thing to say, which is really good news. So we had clients calling us 2-3 weeks ago saying, we want protective services. We want to help, understand what are our crisis communication plans, what are our crisis management plans, how do we protect our assets and people, and a real worry about voter intimidation the day of. I know a lot of the states and polling places have kind of gamed that out. What do you do if someone comes with, and it's an open carry state? So luckily none of that happened. So for immediate for business, their perspective is that's good. I think the issue is going to be the next 24 to 48 hours in particular. Now we may see, a contested election that goes on for weeks and weeks if there's legal challenges. At Control Risks, we are saying, we don't think that there are evident avenues for Trump to win, given the legal and the political situation now. That may change. But regardless, we're seeing an elevated risk as it relates to the time period through a contested election. Now, why is that? Because it's civil unrest, right? So again, we haven't seen anything really flare in any significant way. But Saturday is the day of action in the States, right? So we've seen commentary by right-wing and left-wing extremist groups of this is a planned day of action. So that's the concern is how is this going to go? And really, that's going to be driven by the rhetoric out of the campaigns, right? Yeah. And as it relates to, we all saw Donald Trump's press conference the other day, and that rhetoric, I think, added fuel to the fire. And so it'll be interesting to see as states get called, if they get called for Biden, what's his reaction, but also what's the reaction of the rest of the Republican Party, right? And Fox News, and how does the media handle it? So I think everyone has a responsibility to try to not add fuel to the fire. So we're going to have to see how that plays out. But that's the immediate term. And then the other thing I'll just mention, again, as it relates to business in the States, is a concern about the workplace. Right. So, United States has a higher incidence of workplace violence. And the concern there is, now a lot of people are working from home with, coronavirus. But if you're an employer that has big manufacturing facilities, or you've got big retail footprint, and if you have big employee base that's showing up to work and they may have disagreements on politics, does that manifest itself in more physical risks in the workplace? So that's something clients are also looking at.
Yeah, we're speaking with Angela Mancini, the partner at Control Risks. And Angela, a little bit closer to home, you represent and look after a number of projects for multinational clients in the ASEAN region. What sort of things are you hearing coming out of ASEAN, particularly maybe in Singapore, in terms of the mood. If Biden wins, we feel this, or if Trump stays in, we feel that. What is the kind of general mood that you're gauging in Singapore and the region?
Yeah, it's generally, well, first of all, I'd say it's pretty sector specific and, in some cases country specific, of course. Generally speaking, the clients that I'm talking to, and we work for 80% of the Fortune 500, so it's a lot of Western multinationals with, the C-suite regional executive teams here, and a lot of local companies as well. Singing companies and companies across, India, Japan, Australia, China. The mood, generally speaking, especially in ASEAN, I think is more pro-Biden. And the reason is, again, it's different if you're in oil and gas extractives, right? But the reason is, what do businesses want? They want a plan. They don't want a lot of drama. Ideally, they want lower taxes, right? We get that. But you kind of can't overstate the impact to businesses that, U.S.-China trade war has had. Not the fact that it's we've had tariffs and we've had, a hardening of the relationship. And we feel at Control Risk that is now a structural feature of U.S. foreign policy, right? That U.S.-China hardening is not going away under, a Joe Biden presidency. It would just be done in a different way. But the point is, what do businesses not want? They don't want to wake up to a tweet that, God forbid, names them. But they don't want to have to turn the ship of compliance, looking at sanctions, looking at export controls, looking at having to have geopolitical risk factor in every single risk and opportunity decision they make. So there's a level of certainty that people are looking for. And also, frankly, wanting to have the U.S. step up more in the region, not just militarily, which it has done, but also economically. I mean, obviously, the U.S., as we know, stepped out of TPP. They've not shown up in any real way to East Asia summits, ASEAN summits, and the like. So generally speaking, there's a hope that under a new administration, there'd be more of a showing up and less of a pressure, perhaps, to have to choose. Because, what does Singapore and countries across ASEAN not want to have to do? Japan and the like, they do not want to have to choose between the U.S. and China. We had a client say to us, 3 of their largest markets are 3 Asian members of the Quad, Japan, Australia, and India. They said these are our 3 of our largest markets. But China's our largest market. So how do we handle the business angle? How do we handle the fact we have, people from different countries working in these different places? And that's a challenge.
Yeah, Angela, if I can just ask you, one of the positive things that businesses have mentioned was they like the Trump administration's strength against China and intellectual property and some of these recurring issues that have been around for decades, quite frankly. But at the same time, there has been, and some of the rollback of regulations that have been business friendly, tax cuts, of course. But there has been this other side of the coin, especially here in Asia, where there has been either inconsistency or last minute policy announcements or made by tweet, et cetera, that have really been difficult for businesses to digest and plan for. What are your clients telling you about that in terms of the way a Trump administration would have to go forward or what they would look forward to from a Biden administration?
Yeah, I think what you're describing is very real. I mean, I remember when Trump first got elected, a big U.S. client here, shall remain nameless, said in an off-the-record forum that they were saying, we've actually hired a few people just to watch now the tweets that might name us.
Oh, wow.
Because if they name us or our sector, but especially if they name us by name, we got to hustle. So it's a government affairs regulatory challenge. So that's a very real issue. And even if you're not named, we have other clients said to me this week, that he works in the tech sector across Asia. And he said the volume of just tweets and information coming at us from a regulatory and government affairs perspective is so high. How do we, separate the signal from the noise? And what do we actually act on? And, I've got my American CEO headquarters team asking me, what does this all mean? And how do I parse through it, right? So Control Risk has been doing a lot of help with clients on that. But I think it's the volume of information and then not knowing what you need to act on, because a lot of time we have seen tweets and then there's kind of no real follow-up. So
is there expectation that might change in the next 4 years, even if it is a Trump administration?
I think certainly a Biden administration that would change. I think a Trump administration, I think the situation there would be kind of Trump unleashed and Trump vindicated. I mean, if we're in a situation now where if Trump were to win the election at this point, kind of skin of the teeth, there would be maybe a bit of a revenge feeling or, a feeling of, I pulled through So I think the issue is it's Trump unleashed to some extent. He's not going to be running for re-election. Then you also have the people around him, right? So, people get tired. People tend to cycle out of those senior jobs every couple of years anyway. He's already working with a pretty light bench because a lot of people already cycled out, and it's hard to get new people into that administration, and he cycles through them quickly. So you also got to think about who's around him, right, in the positions that matter. So I think, we would probably see a lot more of the same in the second term, and it'd be unclear to what extent the China hawks would, have more of a say in a second Trump administration. They already have a pretty large say. And again, just to make the point again, regardless of who wins the presidency, that toughening relationship, U.S.-China relationship, is now a fundamental feature of U.S. foreign policy. It's just going to be a matter of style and how it's actually implemented.
Yeah.
Angela, you make a point that's been brought up several times by our guest this morning and also by one of our contributors, Don Pierce, who put on Facebook 2 months of Trump having free access to the nuclear arsenal. But in the short term, I think this is something that has been overlooked in the analysis, which is, I've mentioned it before, we've still got 2.5 months of the Trump presidency, whatever happens. And he has shown a degree of volatility, shall we say, in recent days. The risk assessment, the risk management must be something at the very front of all your analysis in the coming days and weeks, surely. What happens in the next 2.5 months? How do your companies, your clients feel about that?
Yeah, I think you're raising a great point, and I think it's been pretty underreported. I mean, we have 75 days, more or less, until January 20th. And so I think, some of it will depend on if we do have a contested election scenario and people are kind of behaving themselves, waiting for litigation to play out, that cuts into that time, okay? But regardless of how long that time period is, I do think it's risky if Trump loses. It's unclear if he's going to be focused on policy. I mean, he may be more focused on, kind of what's his next iteration. He's got a lot of lawsuits. Some of them are federal criminal lawsuits in New York on taxes. So he, will likely be, I would think, turning his attention to, what am I doing next? Because now I'm no longer, sitting president. That means I can be indicted. And what does that look like? So in that case, does he just kind of turn the reins, as it were, over to some of the policy people and let them kind of really drive what's going to happen? And then he just implements it. And if so, who are those people? Is that Peter Navarro? And we see a tougher line on China. I do think that, that we could expect to see some increased volatility if you have a personality that's already volatile, that's now, upset and kind of struggling with this loss. If it comes to that, I think that's a lot of uncertainty there.
Angela Mancini, partner at Control Risks, thanks very much for being with us today. Always a great insight. And as the voting progresses and the election progresses, we'll, of course, have you on again to talk about what those implications might be. Thanks for today.
Great. Thanks for having me.